All right, let me say good morning to everyone, and let me start off from the very beginning to say that the Houston's drinking water is safe. Let me start off by saying that the water is safe. It was safe through the floods, and it will continue to be safe. So let me start off by saying that. The recent test, though, by the city's own Public Works and Engineering Department showed that the chlorine disinfectant levels were below the state standard at about 7% of the hundreds of testing sites, and there are roughly about 450 testing sites. And what I mean by that, the chlorine level should be at 95% or higher. And so, based on our recent testing, it was at 7% of the 100 testing sites, but I'm going to break it down in different months. The test showed no problems with the bacterial level in the water, so I want to underscore that. But when chlorine disinfectant levels are too low at more than 5% of the testing sites, the Texas Commission on Environmental Quality, TCEQ, standards require the city to notify the public, and we are notifying the public and having this press conference this morning as one of the steps. We are doing that now, and we will do it again in a written public notice as well. But let me emphasize that there is no need for alarm. There's no need to believe your drinking water is unsafe. There's no need to treat or boil water before drinking. In fact, you don't need to do anything. Okay, you don't need to boil water at all. In October, samples at 422 locations throughout the city showed satisfactory levels of disinfectants. The level was too low at 34 sites. And what that means in October, the chlorine level, instead of being 95% or higher, was at 93%. In November, samples at 390 locations showed satisfactory levels, and 58 did not. And so in November, instead of it being 95% or higher, it was at 87%. But in December, samples at 424 locations showed satisfactory levels, and 30 did not. So instead of it being 95% or higher, it was at 93.3%. Here's a quote from the State Commission in a letter that was sent out yesterday, Thursday night. Quote, "The bacteriological samples taken in October, November, and December were in compliance and met drinking water standards." So that's coming from TCEQ. Why did the chlorine levels fall at a small percentage of test sites? We're exactly not sure. That's what we are investigating, but we did our own internal audit. In fact, that was done by, and I'm standing here with Carol Haddock over at PWE, and with Drew Molly, who is the Senior Assistant Director over Drinking Water, and also with Councilmember Christie. So, and in fact, it was Drew that conducted the internal audit. Those findings came back on Wednesday, where it showed that we were below the chlorine level. He then notified TCEQ on Thursday. On yesterday, the letter went out, and of course, we're providing the required notice today, and we'll be providing it in writing. But the chlorine levels fall in standing water through the city water system. When homes, for example, are empty because of flood damage, there is more standing water than usual. And when water lines are turned off temporarily for construction along Highway 290, there is also more standing water than usual. In fact, most of the low levels of chlorine at testing sites were in northwest Houston near the construction at 290. And here's what we're going to do as we move forward. Public Works will closely monitor chlorine levels throughout the city and conduct maintenance at city water plants and pumping stations to increase water flow. And a private consulting firm, in fact, we've already contracted with AECOM, is taking a fresh look at the water system to see if we need to make further changes. AECOM was the same external partner that we utilized during Hurricane Water that assisted us in keeping the Northeast Water Purification Plant up and running when it was totally submerged. And so we are utilizing them here, and they have done work in this area before. But the point of the matter is the water is safe. And let me also explain, those who test the chlorine level is different from those who test the bacterial level. So it's done by two different groups. And so the water is safe. The chlorine level fell below the 95% in October, November, and December. And when it falls below, we're obligated to provide the notice, and that's what we are doing starting today, and it also will be provided in written form as well. Carol, did I?
Absolutely, that's correct.
Did you want to add anything, Carol?
I believe we're good.
Okay, and we'll take questions from anyone.
Did the storm have an impact on this? Was this storm related? You mentioned construction and some other things, but
I can't necessarily just say it was storm related. Certainly may have added to our problems when you have standing water. For example, people out of their homes. And when there's standing water, that exacerbates the problem. Certainly the construction along 290, because when you look at where we did fall below that 95% threshold, it is in Northwest Houston along the 290 corridor. So when, for example, when TxDOT is doing their work out there, they end up having to disconnect, cut off the water, creating the stagnant water. And so most of the, where we're seeing that the chlorine level fell is right in Northwest along that 290 corridor where the construction is taking place. The water comes from those three water purification plants from the east side. It then goes over to the west side, and in order to get over to the west side, it goes through these pumping stations. So when it's leaving the water purification plant, the requisite levels are there in chlorine. By the time it comes through those pumping stations and reach that northwest side, the chlorine level does drop. And so that's what we're taking a look at. How do we equalize the total system? But when you look at where we are falling short, it's pretty much concentrated in the northwest sector.
And the percentages that you read, that's percentages of the entire system. That can't fall below the system-wide 95%.
That's great.
But in the instances where it did fall below, how low was it? Is there half as much as it should have been, 75% as much as it should have been?
It's pretty much where it fell short. It's in that northwest quadrant. So, for example, in October, when it was at it was 93%. That was pretty much concentrated in that northwest quadrant. In November, when it was 13% low, 87%, same thing. And then in December, it was only 6.7% below. It was at 93.7, and again, concentrated pretty much in that northwest quadrant.
And I guess what I'm asking is the concentration levels, the percentage you're talking about, is that within the water or within, you have 100 water testing sites, has 95% of
Okay.
being,
You want to? Sure. Yeah. Let me have Carol address that.
So there's two different, and I believe what you're asking about is the actual level of the residual chlorine.
Yes.
And so the level of residual chlorine is supposed to be between 0.5 and 4 milligrams per liter. And in those areas where the residual is low, it's less than 0.5. So it's between 0 and 0.5. And that's the measurement that shows up. And that's what, every one of those that's less than 0.5 is what comes to that 6.7%. Or that 13%.
But the less than 0.5, that was still enough to kill all the bacterial problems, right?
That's correct. And the samples that were taken to the lab showed that there is no bacteria in those samples that were taken at the same time that the chlorine was measured. Samples were taken and transported to the lab and analyzed at the lab and showed no bacteria growth, no concerns for bacteria. The water was safe, and the state confirmed that in their statement.
And with what frequency will the city be testing the water system as Public Works continues to do maintenance and AECOM works on this?
So we are out testing the system every day. We take an average of 450 samples a month, specifically to test for residual chlorine in the quality of the drinking water. And the mayor has asked us, and we have agreed that we're going to step up the frequency in the northwest quadrant until we can confirm to him and the state that we have the chlorine levels above the residual requirement.
And that's a good question, Rebecca, because it's concentrated primarily in the northwest quadrant. I want more testing done in that northwest quadrant along 290. I also want us to work, make sure that we coordinate and collaborate a lot more with TxDOT in terms of when they're cutting off. And then we're asking NACOM, our external partners, to kind of look at the overall system. And especially since we, based on our testing, by the time when the water leaves the water purification plants, we're at the right level. But by the time you leave the pump stations and get over into that sector, it starts to drop. So we want them to test the overall system on how we can improve that. But I am asking for more testing in that northwest quadrant. We want to make sure, number one, that we correct it as quickly as possible. And I've asked him to see, if at all possible, I want us to be back on track by the end of the month of the next reporting period.
Do you have an idea of the number of customers that we're talking about in that northwest quadrant? I know there are a lot of businesses up there, a lot of homes up there. Any idea what we're talking about as far as people-wise go or anything like that?
We do not have that number at the tip of our fingers, but we're happy to get it.
Okay. But the key that I want to underscore is that in October, the water was deemed safe. Same thing in November, same thing in December. You know, Drew finished the internal audit on Wednesday, provided the findings to TxDOT on yesterday, and we are having this press conference today as a part of the public notice, but then there will all be a written notice provided as well. Okay? Any other questions? Thank you all. Appreciate it.